Hello and welcome, Dr. Alastair. How are you?
I'm very fine. I should say Sandi, the doctor, but anyway, here I am. Yeah, it's lovely to see you. Are you well, Sandi? How's it going?
Yeah, I'm well, and I'm excited to speak with you about the images you've picked this evening, and one from me right at the end. Just before we started recording, we were talking about the problematic nature of the word kid, but I have titled it this evening just a kid because we're going to be talking about images of children. But before we begin proper, I would like to just come back to what viewers will have missed, which is why the word kid has a bit of a bite. Why did you think that?
Well, I don't know. A child seems better. Kid, it's just a shortened version. I don't know its origins. It would seem like it's maybe from America or something. It's just maybe some sort of, I don't know, it's just kid. I just prefer kid. It's all right. Children, something about childhood. It isn't kidhood, or there's something nice about childhood. But there you are, it's just me.
Well, the reason why we're meeting this evening is you had proposed quite some time ago that we do look at images of childhood together and approach them kind of questioning or wondering if we can view those images without a sense of sentiment or sentimentality connected to them.
Yeah, I suppose the essence of children, usually children, well, I don't know, from my own recall, it was like, I think it was always these adults speaking. I think children want to be quite active when they're young, and they want to be moving and they want to be about. And the adult world is very, boring and patterned and, staid and, structured. And children, I think, especially when they're younger, like going to primary school or what have you, they do want to move, but they're placed in classrooms and expected to conform in certain ways. And I think it denies quite a lot of the innocence and a lot of the humor and the kind of the energy and joie de vivre of what childhood is. Our society today, our modern society, I don't know if it, especially with developing technologies, many of which are fine, but I think I don't know how comfortable it is with the intelligence of children. Let me put it like that. The children seem to me to have a more natural intelligence, which in many cases is kind of can be drummed out of them, unfortunately. But so this wonderful unknown photograph taken apparently in America, and it was about a group of children listening to the dawn chorus. And I think what's interesting about it is that it's the attention that the children demonstrate in probably Victorian America, if there's such a thing, in a contradictory term, of maybe even late 19th century, first Eastman cameras coming out. But the attention in listening, there's one of the children who actually seems to want to become a bird. This amazing cacophony of sound, and the way they're some of the gestures of the children. On the screen left is a young child, and she's sort of turning her head slightly to emphasize the listening. Another one has her finger up to her mouth, but the wee fella at the top, he's so intent. It's like he wants to join this sound of this incredible brilliance of birds in the morning, of a dawn chorus. So yeah, so the visual, I suppose the synesthetic element of it, Sandi, where you have, a visuality and quite an early photograph, I suppose, in many respects, generally, but showing children just, if you want, enamored and alert and aware to sound, and it kind of being taken. It doesn't seem to me too posed, the photograph.
Alastair, how did you find this photograph?
I came across it on the internet, Sandi. It was just accidental. Somebody had said that they liked this photograph. They didn't know where it came from, and they were intrigued. But they seemed to know that it was a dawn chorus that they were listening to, and it does seem to match. and the informality of it, quite a lot of photographs at this time, I think, well, many would have been quite formal, and there would have been nature and children maybe mightn't have run together in this more spontaneous way. They just seem so engrossed, but I do really like, I'm very taken by this this child. It just seems to, like Peter Pan nearly, wants to fly up, and he's hearing this incredible sound of birds just engaging in this symphony. It's just, yeah. But
I wonder about the sense that, you know, you've told me that it's children listening to a dawn chorus, and someone's told you that it's children listening to a dawn chorus. But I wonder, we could probably supplant many other things in there, couldn't we? Children in attention to something. But is it particular in your reading or perception of the photograph to think of it as dawn and the birds?
Yeah, it is good. It's the way that I say some of the gestures, the child sitting on the ground and turning the head. So people would tend to, if you say, well, listen, you know, don't close your ear, like open your ear in a sense, they'll sort of do like that. So the child's doing that. And the child in the foreground sitting on the ground also, they're kind of like, there's an attention and listening. And then the fourth one along off screen left there, with her finger like that, it's sort of, they're listening. And even the child whose face you can't see is turned away. It's about ears and it's about listening. It would seem to me that that's true, that it was listening to the dawn chorus. They're listening to this. They're caught, and also it has stilled them. Talking earlier about children moving and needing to move, and in fact, the need to move in order to the brain to develop, all of that learning by doing, so important. That here they're stilled almost for this moment, so they're caught on a still, and they're not kept. They're sort of like framed in this still, and they're also, their bodies are stilled in order to listen, in order to doubly listen, to take that, engage with that synesthetic thing, you know, that's what I say. So an evocation, if you would, of listening as children.
When you're looking, are you placing yourself amongst them?
Well, I suppose we must sort of maybe project a certain amount in reading body language and reading kind of, you know, gestures, like I was saying about as you turn the head. So there's a kind of a transference. There may be, and being able to read images, being able to read figures in a framed way, in an imaged way. So there's probably some type of identification with that, and obviously my reading of it, is present. Yeah.
In terms of like a wider question about sentiment, though, or sentimentality, is this a sentimental photograph?
It could be read as sentimental, and maybe my kind of engagement with the simplicity of it, maybe the deceptive simplicity of it, could be seen as sentimental. But I wonder what way would you define sentiment, in what sense?
Sentiment for me would suggest that I identify somehow, that I create a feeling all of my own through looking at something that I identify with, to forge a kind of a relationship, really, that makes me further feel. And that happens all the time with me looking, is that there's a built, again, we talked before we started recording about building relationships. I build relationships into things I see.
For me, sentiment would be more kind of like, I was going to not say modeling so much, but it would be more gooey in a sense. I don't think that's within your definition, Sandi. You know, it's more to do with a stereotypical kind of
the sweetness and
over emotional. Whereas I think it's possible to kind of just look at something and for emotion possibly be engaged, but it isn't kind of dwelt upon.
No, but also in the looking of this, if one can be passive in the looking.
Yeah.
Does one, or do I I wonder, still become part of the action. Now, that might not equate necessarily to what you think of as sentiment or sentimentalizing this scene. But for me, there is a kind of overlap there, that where I can passively engage with what I see, the impulse is to join with it because I want to belong to it. And that desire to belong, in this scene especially, which has now conjured so many kind of beautiful associations of quiet, of communality, togetherness, children, innocence. I suddenly realized I'm ensnared entirely by sentiment in what I thought was passive looking.
Yeah, I don't know. I would suggest that you can possibly look at something without necessarily, attaching a belonging to it. That it might be possible, for me, not necessarily yourself, but that the attention that's kind of engaged, for me, doesn't sentimentalize in that sense. And what I mean by sentimentalization is maybe an over memorization, or a kind of a return memorization, where I kind of purr over it myself and go, oh, yes, that's kind of like, that's what that is, and confirm with me. Whereas the other way, which is maybe non-sentimental, which you might be referring to as a passive awareness, which can, be clear, I would suggest, seems more brighter, more in tune with the kind of the humanity of it, where it isn't that it's belonged, it's just going, right, that's our humanity. This is an image, a photograph of a group of children, and they're listening, and there's a kind of, and there's a different variety of composition, but there's also a different variety of, say, body languages, and it really comes together, I think, in that sense. And I don't think that I wouldn't define that as being sentimental or belonging. It's just that human resonance. But that's just me. I could be over sentimentalizing all of that.
Years ago at a flea market here in Bournemouth somewhere, I came across a tabletop full of photographs. You often do that in flea markets and car boot sales. And there were some discarded family albums. In fact, we've talked about this before, actually, when we met with, I think, Philip, one of our earlier dialogues. This idea that, people, even photographs of their own children, can be discarded and forgotten about and completely unloved because of, well, loss, human loss. Somebody's died, somebody's moved away, somebody's quite literally lost something. But I bought a series of postcards that had original prints glued to the front, and they were from around about the same kind of time, 1900. And it is a series of images of the same little girl with a stuffed stork. And it's almost like a sequence, I suppose, but I'm assuming that the postcards would have been seen or sold separately. Just so happened that there were 4 of them together. And the little girl is playing with the stork in one. In another, she's patting it on the head. In another one, she's sitting on the floor by its feet. They're very bizarre. And there's something quite challenging in them, because part of the reason I bought them is because I didn't want anyone else to have them, not in a sort of envy on my part, but more I was concerned about the misinterpretation of them, or the misuse of the girl through the seeing of her, because she's partially nude and her little body seems so exposed to me. And I've often thought about those photographs. I will show them to you if I find them. There's something on the edge of a sentiment in them that leads away from goodness. So where that sweetness becomes sick, not just sickly. And I think that there's an element of that in a lot of photographs of children more widely. There's a misappropriation of childhood through photographs. And the kind of chocolate box dream of Shirley Temple type girls and blonde ringlets and pink ribbons, hand tinted, quite literally on boxes of chocolates. Seems like such a bizarre way to ensnare emotions of adults. Such a strange thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. Stereotypical identities of anyone, children, boys, girls, whatever way, is I think always a dangerous thing. It's always a way where people become fixed in a kind of a cipher or a code that reduces the humanity, which reduces the children. I think, family albums, Sandi, if I get you right, in that sense, it's people like wanting, like the idealized family, whatever that means. Bearing in mind Philip Larkin's maxim about families, but that it's like the ideal family and the ideal child, or my child, or my family, and the photographing of that. And it's even more to the fore now with selfies and with everybody a lot of people on our planet carrying around, cameras to all intents and purposes, and the documentation of that. And, the whole notion of a selfie, I think, is quite interesting in that. And, and it's particularly pernicious, I think, with young adolescent girls, in fact, where it becomes a matter of identity. There's been a lot of tragedy around that, about, bullying or people, or self-image, and the intense psychological pressure based around all of that. And indeed the sexualization around all of that also. It's very threatening, I think. Culturally, I think it's quite a challenge. I mean, without being prudish about it, but I do think it's quite where our culture is today, with that type of pressure, that superficiality. I mean, worse in many respects. You're talking about, the girl with the stork. It's how that needs to be, how we, I don't know, enfold or enable childhood to maintain a kind of an integrity and an innocence, I think, is a very, very important thing. But I don't know, with the technologies today, I don't know how helpful they are. One might suggest that a lot of them aren't that helpful in many respects.
Why do you think the photographer made this image? Simply to record?
I don't know. For some reason, Sandi, I'm not just saying this, the feeling that I got, the photographer, I think, must have been female. And I don't know why. It's just, I have a feeling about this, that someone actually took a group of children, or went with a group of children, let me put it like this, and had heard the dawn chorus. And the children hadn't really heard this dawn chorus, and had set out early in some morning to take this image. And it's
create stories for the children, though, through the photograph.
Sorry, Sandi, what?
Create stories, back to this idea of, like, we're skirting around the idea of sentiment, but sentiment is also with story often, isn't it?
Yeah, sentiment, I think, is a prearranged type thing. Sentiment is an over kind of sugared memory, whereby it's kind of like syrupy, and it's what comes to mind. I'm thinking, and so the notion of, like, I'm thinking more of sentimental songs, or how people become tear. I mean, in the culture that I come from, it's incredibly sentimental, in many respects, around things like music and songs in particular. But also, I think images, can evoke that type of sentimentality. I mean, I think the challenge is something that, as I feel it, as negative as nationalism, is very much taken on board in the same way as being sentimental around certain images and certain narratives, which narrow down, which don't open up a kind of a discourse. And I think that it is possible to overcoat things, shall we say, in that manner. Yeah.
But for you, are you overcoating when you're looking?
Could be, Sandy, could be overcoating, easily, yeah. Have to be on the guard, what can I say, just, yeah. Kenneth Josephson, yeah, Matthew, 1965. Yeah. Overcoating. This is like, I think these photographs of, one of my favorite books is, Catching Their Eyes, okay, but Salinger's book called 9 Stories. And To Ask Me With Love and Squalor, I think they're a beautiful collection of 9 stories, and most of them are about children. And they're about children in an American context. And I always think America is really the kind of the progenitor of photography in many respects, from Stieglitz onwards. Mm. It's modern, and it was open to photography much more so than Europe, the whole secession of Stieglitz and that. And I think maybe it's to do with the commodification of it, Eastman, Brownies, all of that. But I think a lot of the great photographers happen to be American. And I think the short story, the kind of modernist short story, I think, for me anyway, people like Updike, but it's epitomized by somebody like Salinger. And in that particular book, those short stories first appeared in the New Yorker. And I think that the idea of children, like the innocency of children, this photograph by Kenneth Josephson, of a child who's not really interested in his own image. It's more like the tactility of it. So the child lifts the image, which may be of himself, and he's holding it upside down, or they're holding it upside down in this certain way. They're not really concerned about a selfie. They're not concerned about their own image being taken in this photograph, although it has previously been taken, but yet it's upside down. So there's an interesting, if you want, dialectic going on here, a visual kind of conundrum. But it's also, there's a humor in it, I feel.
There's not a conundrum really for the photographer, though, in that.
No, it was just taken in that way. But I don't think it's exploiting the child, but I could be wrong there. But I do think that it's just like, it's an image of a child that was taken in that way. And it's like, it happens that the image that the child is holding may be an image of themselves that is the one that should be right, but it's upside down. And I like the unspoken communication about that's going on. I've just tried to explain an aspect of it. Also, it could almost be like the child is taking a photograph. If you see on the left hand, you have the wee figure. Yeah, so it's almost like in a bizarre kind of way, like working out, taking a photograph, which is like of a piece of paper. And children will invent things incredibly well and imitate incredibly well.
Yeah.
In a very spontaneous way. Yeah, spontaneity. Children are full of spontaneity, and long may it run.
Isn't it so strange that a child's spontaneity recorded as a photograph by an adult becomes sentimentalized?
I don't know if it's sentimentalized, but I don't know. I think it becomes just an aspect of a question that's raised within this. And the question is it spontaneous? Is it open? Is it complicated? Is it simply the child being a child, or an aspect, a frozen moment, if you want, of a child doing this, and that this frame raises that question and holds the question well? And I like that, but that's me. And I think it's very much in the tradition of let's say those Salinger short stories. They're full of like Zen. They're full of strangenesses in a way when they were done. There's a beautiful one on it called Uncle Wrigley in Connecticut, and it's so infused with beautiful contradiction. And it's from the point of view of a child and our imaginary friend. It's like just, it captures so much. There's so many things run through that short story. But a lot of it's about strangeness, so many questions that are beautifully raised by Salinger through writing. But again, I think that can also be transferred in photographic image, and I think this is attempting to do it.
I think when we look at you picked 2 images by Josephson. And again, question, I mean, I could read about Josephson and I could say that, you know, somebody very fancy has said that it's about, you know, the limitations of form with circumstance and absence and presence and all those things that artists can chuck about to basically baffle ordinary people. And I'm a bit baffled by this. I'm also interested, though, seeing the whole series of work by Josephson, which very similar, lots of them do have this sense of connection to the disconnect between the photograph within the photograph of the same place but twice. In an archive of work that deals with that same incident or incidents over and over, where we have somebody holding a photograph that is of the same or a similar thing, separated by time or some fractional alteration. I do wonder if we could say it's not intentional, or if it's lacking in any sentiment because the intention has been to find that form. It's not the same as making a documentary photograph of children playing in the street, maybe.
Maybe not. I mean, it's the world turned upside down. It's the unexpected. It's the question of, you know, what is not expected. And yes, Josephson's work, I don't really appreciate much of his work. It is about foregrounding the process, which is, you know, a performative trope, if you want, of a lot of modernist writers, a lot of modernist painters, I'm thinking of Magritte, you know, of paintings within a painting. Cécile Aspoon-Pepe does different versions of that, where he has the painting within the painting. And also, I mean, writers, you know, I don't know, Flann O'Brien writing about the characters come to life within a short story and gallop about the room at night and stuff. I mean, so in this sense, yeah, you've got Josephson's trademark of let's take the photograph and we'll do this foregrounding of the process. You know, after a while it becomes, I personally think, a bit staid. But what intrigues me about this one is it's almost like the response of the infant that's just kind of going, what, or just looking. And that to me is like a spontaneous look. It's an unconscious kind of just human baby that's there, that's kind of just looking up at here. It's like a comment saying, what's this art about? What's this foregrounding of this image of, you know, I don't know, the Grand Canyon or somewhere, and here we are at the Grand Canyon, and this guy, you know, with the hand coming in, so, which is his trademark. And then you have a photographer in it, but then you have other children that are looking out over this great chasm. But I still think the main focus is on this expression of the child. It's almost like saying, like the previous photograph where the child has the image turned upside down in many respects, what are you doing? You know, what's going on? You know, and a good questioning one.
Is that not a bit of the photographer to try and make us create that story sense about that child rather than letting the child be?
Well, no, you could say that, well, possibly, Sandi, yeah, but I do think that the child is, I mean, I wonder if the person who was holding, if he was holding the photograph and he also took the photograph, would be quite interesting to know. If you could do that, you know, and take that image, whether that occurred, how contrived or how kind of worked it was. I think because of the nature of the setting, I don't think you could really set that up. You might, but it seems to me that it's a pretty much a happening event. You know, it's been, you know, framed as that moment, and it's capturing that. And as I say, for me, the expression of the child is, you know, brilliant. It's like, you know, what's art about?
Ask though, in you finding the expression of that child so brilliant, is that not in itself sentimentalizing the child?
It could be sentimentalizing the child, but I mean, in what sense is it sentimentalizing it, do you think, Sandi?
In that you've perhaps created a sense that the child is engaged with the process of the photograph in some way.
No, not that it's engaged to the process of the photograph, that the child is just simply, it's the image of the child. It's just there, and the child's going like, what, you know, And it's as simple as that. I don't think it's anything that's, I don't think there's I don't think I'm sentimentalizing on it. It's not sentimental, I would say. It's a kind of it's a documentation of an event and someone trying to do art into the bargain, or make, artistic photography, which makes it, even for me, quite amusing. You've got this person trying to do this, and then suddenly, within it, but the main frame seems to be the center of focus, in fact, is the child's face. So it's a strange one, because this is not like any of his other works. They tend to be, showing the skyline or a person, or, it's a bit contrived, as I said previously, but this isn't.
Very difficult to find, as you can see, unknown. I mean, when you sent it to me, you couldn't find the name or the title.
Yeah, it's out of a photographic magazine, I think, that he submitted.
And I couldn't find the date. I couldn't place it. And I wonder if that's because this one is maybe, I don't know, cast out.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, because it's not like, if I agree, Sandy. I mean, it's challenging to find out about it, and it isn't in his body of work.
Whereas this one, there's actually lots of things connected to this.
Yeah, this is well known of his particular practice. But
also there's sequences from his contact sheet of shooting this boy as well.
Are there? I didn't know that. Yeah.
That you can look at, and why this one is the one that makes it through the net.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting, because there's others where he's not holding it up.
Right.
Running along.
Yeah. Yeah, you wonder if he did that, or what. But yeah, that's
I find this photograph extraordinarily bleak. And
really?
Yeah, I really had quite, when I saw this was the photograph you wanted to put in this, I reacted quite badly to it.
Did you? Yeah. Sorry about that. I hope. Right.
Well, but that in itself was quite unusual for me to react badly to a visual in that way. I really do like to credit myself with giving everything a bit of a chance, but this is it seems so contrived to me. And
what way do you think it's bleak and contrived then, Sandi? Go ahead.
I think because too much of an expectation is made of us as a viewer, an audience, to engage with that baby in context of the sense that he seems to wish that they weren't there.
Really? You think the expression is saying you shouldn't be there? I think he's just going, what?
Oh, no. I mean, the photographer wishes they weren't there.
But then why take the photograph?
Well, I think that's why I find it a hard photograph. I don't, I'm not denying there's a lot in this photograph, actually. In many ways, it's funny that this is the one that's probably, in the eyes of the world, the least popular, which is why we can't find out very much about it. Yeah. But actually, this is the one that's probably the most, to me, interesting, but it's also the one I reject. Because I don't want to look at it. I don't want to look at it because there seems something quite, bleak about it, and resistant to that family.
How is it bleak, Sandi?
The impression I get from it, which of course is me entirely sentimentalizing and contextualizing way beyond the realms of any other kind of person who would look at this, is that it just feels to me like the photographer stands in a place that we're supposed to think of as an enormous natural beauty, and that this family blocks his otherwise perfect view, which is represented by the held photograph, and that there's something scummy about them to that photographer, and that in the presence of there being the original image, which is free from this beastly family, we get a sense of like the longing or the wistfulness or the regret of them being there.
I think you're definitely, I mean, why, again, it behoves the question, why would the photograph be taken then if he feels the family are beastly or whatever word you want to put onto it? I don't know. You know what I mean?
I think the point
yeah.
is, though, it's done its job, and you've done your job by putting this one here, because I've had such a reaction to it.
Right,
And
right.
I'm invested in it so much. So much of my emotion is now invested in this photograph.
Right.
It's done its job, hasn't it? If it was,
Well, it depends what its job is. It's what people bring to it. So if what I'm saying to you is this thing of just people out and this person trying to kind of bring his art form in, so he's trying this matching of the photograph to the landscape, and it's on a viewing platform, and there's a family and there's somebody happening to be taking a photograph. Okay, so that's a praxis, a kind of performativity within it. And they're all looking out over that, but the child isn't. The child doesn't care. I mean, I don't think it cares whether it's looking out over the canyon or not. It's just like suddenly, like, attention is somewhere else, and you know what, But anyway, it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, Blake. I don't know. I mean, if I could read Blake into it,
it goes as far as loathsome. It's a loathsome.
loathsome. Bleak and loathsome. Right. Okay, Sandy. Well, look, I didn't want, I should have thought before I sent it that you might have been reading it like bleak and loathsome. But there you go. That can be good. It can be a good consideration. Right. Sally Mann. Right.
So this is the one that I just tacked on the end, because I felt quite self-conscious that you'd picked the rest and I hadn't picked any. And she is probably one of the most talked about photographers of our time, or certainly of the late 20th century. Anybody watching who doesn't know about Sally Mann, she's a photographer who's probably courted controversy. Her book work, Immediate Family, was met with at once the applause of critics and the disdain and horror of a particular kind of group of righteous parents and others who questioned the morality of photographing children in a way that could be seen as sexualized or exploitative in some way. But the children she photographs, whether it makes this better, worse, or nothing at all, is they are her children. Her 3 children are the key characters in her work. And to me, they are the kind of epitome of something that balances between a precarious sentimentalization of childhood and something totally other, which goes beyond it. I'm aware it's a very standard thing to put a photograph by Sally Mann in a conversation that's about sentimentality and childhood. So I know I'm being very obvious in it, but I do think it has a place here. I'd love to know what you think about it.
I've often thought about, what Sally Mann's children feel now. There's people who, is it Meatyard's work? I mean, there are people who have photographed, Harry Callahan, have photographed their children, and I mean, their own children. We were talking earlier about like parents photographing their children. And I would wonder what way, her children feel about that. I mean, those issues that you raised, Sandy, what way they would feel. Would they feel that their parent was doing justice to their images, or, what would their responses be? That's what comes to my mind, because, yeah, you're saying you can see the teeth marks in this, it's clearly something may have occurred, and this, maybe if that's the adult arm. Yeah, I mean, and some of them there were, accusations of sexualizing, some of those images. It's a difficult subject, but I wonder, as a parent, how you feel about that.
Well, as you know, I don't allow photographs of my child on social media. And I've kind of fiercely guarded that, and sometimes have found it quite tricky with loved ones who've wanted to share images of my child on their own social media feeds, proud aunties or grandparents or cousins and so on. Always with the best of intentions and for the right reasons. Sure. But I felt that my child needs space outside of that very public forum to choose a way. Now, they're an age now where they can make their own choice, and that's fine. And there's a sense that in wanting to belong with their contemporaries, they, of course, want to have photographic images, or I was telling you earlier, you know, dance routines and makeovers and stuff that to me seems kind of extraordinary and bizarre. That there's a want from my child to share those things with their friends via social media. And so images of my child are undoubtedly popping up, or will pop up in the next few years, I'm sure. My role, I felt very much, was to keep that image out of the public domain and to limit the consumption of my child's image. And I think quite a lot of people I speak to are taken aback by that, because I love photographs. I make photographs all the time. I myself like having my own photograph taken, and I don't feel afraid to share my image, my own image. But it just seemed thoughtless to allow like a proliferation of my child's image at a time when they perhaps weren't able to give consent, full consent, for the reasons that one might then choose in adulthood to share one's own image. So the reason why I'm explaining this is because in context of Sally Mann and looking at her work, I've found that I've rather celebrated Mann's work. I've enjoyed the work. I've taken enormous pleasure and inspiration from looking at Mann's work of her children. And even at times when I can tell, for me even, it sails very close to the edge of what could be considered toothless. It does bite sometimes, and there is an overstep occasionally. But I must always remember that's me looking at these photographs of children with so many layers of my own experience, of my projections, and also of my adult awareness of things. Whereas to take wholly and completely a sense that the children in the photographs have been behaving as children, that sense of something being biting or being toothless, there's no intention of sex or well, I mean, mainly sex actually, or even an awareness of death in the way that I think some people worry about in these images, even though they might conjure those notions within an adult mind. So, I mean, I look at this one and it's called Jessie Bites, or Jessie Biting, from 1985, and it's in the book Work, Immediate Family, and it's of Jessie. We can see the bite marks on the arm. There's also, this isn't actually the full image, there's more below where we can see these streaks across the naked body of the child. And I've talked about this photograph quite a lot with older students in school and others similar to it, certainly from the same series. And the things that can be seen in it is perhaps different to what was intended to be seen in it. And if it's not, and if man wants to provoke or kind of conspire a sense of something that is untoward or salacious in some way, still, there's no denying that, to me at least, these are extraordinarily beautiful photographs and ones that I want to return to looking at. And whether that's because I engage with them as sentimental objects of childhood, I'm not sure. I have to spend longer thinking about that.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't think it's salacious, the image, and I don't think it's sentimental. I mean, I do think it's quite a profound photograph in many respects, attempting to engage and share. It's quite a, I suppose, an intimate photograph of a child that might be hurt or about to, cry, or, whatever emotional kind of emotion of that kind.
But isn't it fascinating how we get to a point where we lose ourselves in the cracks between our own memory and experience and then the intention of what somebody else wants us to see? So, for example, we're looking at Jessie and we're looking at the little fingers at the chest, and we see dirt and possibly blood. And those things in themselves are very kind of emotive. Child's dirty hand, a child's bloodied fingers.
It reminds me a little bit, the series that Dorothea Lange did of Immigrant Mother, if you know that,
yeah.
The kind of, the ones around the Dust Bowl. I mean, the photograph wouldn't be remiss there. If you didn't know Sally Mann or photography, you could say it could have been in the 1930s. There's nothing there indicative of the actual period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of her photographs are quite like this, of children that just more by design and default, I suppose, in a sense, they're in poor conditions, and and they're dirty in that manner of speaking.
Of course, the thing is, though, is we know that with Lang's work for the Farming Association, she was photographing destitution and the horrors of a migrating mass of especially tenant farmers who'd been displaced.
1 million people. Yeah, absolutely.
Yet with this, we're looking at Jessie and Virginia and Emmett on their sprawling land in their probably quite comfortable life, and they've been allowed to roam and be free, we can assume, on that land. And man has been there to record their activity. I suppose the question might be is how much she's informed what those activities or actions are in order to make the photographs, or if simply she has set up her large format camera somewhere and waited.
Yeah, I mean, all of them. Yeah, all that I was saying was, if you didn't know Sally Mann and you didn't know the context of the book, the photo book or that, and you were to put this in with a number of Lang's work, I think people mightn't see the difference, in that manner of speaking, just this particular image.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to do that maybe at some stage, to see if it would run true, that you would have that type of association.
Does it inspire worry?
No, it doesn't. The child, you feel that the child might be hurt. One doesn't like, I mean, children crying, it's not a nice, I mean, in any sense, it seems like for me, it's like it seems like there's a hurt. The child is maybe, as I say, it could be read as about to cry in that manner of speaking, or has contemplated something, and the child doesn't seem happy. And that would be my reading of it. And yeah, whereas you don't know what that child's doing, or that child. And these children, so this is my sentiment, this is my unconscious sentimentality, probably with this first one emerging there, Sandi, but there's something, I mean, if you go in, and it'd be great to go in the close-up of some of those expressions. And as I say, the child that wants to, just the child at the top, and like if that child could fly, there's something incredible about really like physically wanting, like whatever's happening, if the sound of the birds, the beauty of that, and really like responding in their full humanity to that. I really do. Yeah, there's an innocence about a lot of this that I like also, and an openness. You know, that child at the top is like, would you say, lost to the world, but in the world in a sense, as they all are in their different ways. That's what I think is nice. Most of them.
Would you say?
Isn't it that abandonment, that innocence that children can have? That's so, I feel anyway, is so endearing. That they're not caught up in the muddle of like too much memory. They're more in this moment. Yeah. So,
But I suppose I wonder, the children might not be caught up in too much memory, but the audience is.
Can be, although it's kind of it's like when people see children, or even it's been proven, like with young animals, like a puppy or a chick. I mean, actually, in the presence of that, I think from a parenting perspective, or even people that aren't necessarily parents, there can be a real resonance of something, a nurturing, a sense of like without any kind of, without too much, without sentimentality, just a sense of like the joy of seeing a child playing or running, you know, dancing down the street, or, you know, and just the sheer kind of celebration of their childhood, but in a way that's not conscious. They're not looking for to be confirmed as that does. It's just the whole thing of life goes through them in a presence. I mean, with this child, maybe not at that moment, but no doubt at times, yes, you would hope that life has kind of, you know, lifted them up, and, you know, and there's no difference, you know, the life has just gone through them, and it's just, there's nothing they can do but sing or dance or stay still and listen, you know, or hold a thing up, or just look, or even, I mean, taking on board sadness can be difficult for children also, obviously, you know. Yeah.
Alastair, I've got a lot more I need to think about now.
Yeah. Is it Wordsworth who said the child is the parent of the adult, or the child? Yeah, the child, the parent, but the child parents, we parent, as children, we parent ourselves. I think that's a very, very interesting thing to say. That the child has parented us, and it's how much of that child is present in a way that isn't, you know, caught up on things, sentimentalized in that way. It's just like part of like whatever we meet, and it's that great meeting of life that children have that is so wonderful, you know, and needs to be enabled and needs to be given the space to really kind of like flower. I think it's great. we don't in our world today, Sandi, I think we really let children down. I mean, an awful lot. We really do so much. It's really, you know, but some people try. Some people, you know, teaching, you know, the greatest start. I mean, and parenting, very good parenting. Yeah, to enable that child to parent itself is surely what it's all about, isn't it? What do you think of that, Sandi? The child parents the adult. Do you think that's true?
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
In a non-sentimental manner, not without bleakness, or when bleakness comes, we accept it. We don't.
Also, I noticed that the child helps the parent, me, come to terms, of course, with my own childhood.
Well, could you develop on that a little bit? Could you share that a little bit more?
Well, it's,
if you don't mind me asking.
It's a very simple thing, actually. It's about perhaps I thought it was me becoming wise to my, particularly like my own parents, through being a parent. But actually I realized instead what it is me becoming aware of my childhood, not by living vicariously or through the proxy, but by observing my own child, and to have a better sense of childhood through observing childhood, not being in childhood at last. I'm aware there's a danger in that way of thinking, but sometimes it's not even really about thinking, it's simply about being with my child and having a sense that they're so powerful is a difficult word. There's so much power in childhood. Not power over others, but just something extraordinary in it. Exactly what you're saying, really. Sadly, I wonder when I was a child if, I had a quite sort of imagination-fueled childhood. I feel very lucky. But
and do you observe that? What would the characteristics of observing your own child be? And that you're talking about observing that. How does that flower?
As I said, I think it helps me come to terms with probably my own loneliness as a child, particularly it's a very specific thing. My child is an only child, and I was in many ways an only child until much later. And I felt very kind of conflicted about it in my earlier adult years. And then becoming a parent and seeing my only child operate as an only child has somehow smoothed away a kind of residual anxiety about that loneliness. And yet, funnily enough, I still worry about my child being lonely. When I observe them in their day-to-day, how they are, it's vital and reassuring.
Wonder, I've often thought that there's no such thing as loneliness, because if you look at that, to see loneliness means there has to be two things. So within that, if there's a kind of, not yourself, but a parent and a child, and there's that feeling or a sense of, apparent loneliness, is that so?
I do think, as we discussed, we could come back to this with more images that take us into maybe a more personal realm if we feel brave enough to do it.
Well, if you want, Sandi, it's a tricky area, you know what I mean? If you want, that is challenging.
Well, Alastair, thank you for meeting with me about this.
It's okay. Thank you, Sandi. It's always a pleasure, and it's always enlightening in the context of looking at the visual in this way. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alastair.